Hey, everybody. Welcome for another edition. This is Monday, October 17th, and this is another edition of Conversations, Relevant Conversations with Bishop John Selvers. I'm your host, and I'm excited again to be here tonight to talk a little bit about one of my favorite things to talk about, and that's things that have to do with change as it relates to political matters of all sorts. And right now, what's on my mind is the vote. And this upcoming election is one of several things that I think are important. And right now, it is one of the most talked about and relevant things in this country right now. Did y'all know we have an election in a couple of weeks? Did you know that we got an election in a couple of weeks? And so I'm going to be talking with a couple of my favorite people in the whole wide state of Connecticut. Some of my favorite people in regards to this upcoming election. I want to hear a little bit about their thoughts, what they're thinking about, what they're working on, what's important to them. And then who knows? We might even get a couple of predictions. I don't know. But let's just see. Let me bring in the director of Connecticut Citizen Action Group, Brother Tom Swan. Come on and greet folk here.
Hello, Bishop Selders. It's an honor to be here.
Glad to have you.
An honor to be with the other panelists this evening.
And gonna talk with our brother and friend and colleague in the work. Met this young man a couple of years ago when he won his seat in the state legislature here in Connecticut on the House side, and that was back. I think he was running in 2008 or nine, somewhere around in there, and then he moved over to the Senate. He graduated from the House to the Senate, and now he's the big dog. He's big wig. He's got an official title, like the super duper deputy of the Senate, the state. And I'm messing it up. I'm poking a little fun at him, and he knows it. He's our friend and our brother and colleague. I respect him greatly for the work that he continues to do. He shows up every day ready to do the work. This is Connecticut State Senator Gary Winfield. And if I was in my church at the house, I would say, y'all stand on your feet. Y'all give him a hand just because. Just give him a hand just because.
That's a great intro. Well, good evening. I'm happy to be here, ready for this conversation. Let's go.
Oh, Lord. I like being who I am in these moments because since it's my show, I get to kind of be like I am. So anyway, and we really don't have to put on any airs. This is, I think, every election is an important election, right? So let's just put that on the table. Every election is an important election. I think because of what's at stake here in the state of Connecticut, I wanted to have some Connecticut conversation. All right, let's talk Connecticut, and we can jump out there and talk on the national front as it seems appropriate to do so. But let's talk some Connecticut politics. And Tom, why don't we toss it to you first to talk about what's on your mind as you think about the Connecticut general election. We got. Let's be clear. We got five or six constitutional seats, right? Constitutional offices. The governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of the state, treasurer, comptroller. I'm missing one. What's the other one?
Gary might know this one, the attorney general.
I said governor and attorney general. Oh, the attorney general. That's right. No, I didn't say the attorney general. That's right. I said governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of the state, treasurer, comptroller, the attorney general. That's right. Ooh. Brother Wong, he'd be all upset with me if he knew I forgot his seat that he's running for. But those are the constitutional offices. And then every 2 years here in the state of Connecticut, both the Connecticut legislature, in the legislature, we have the House and the Senate, and those seats are are all up for grabs, right? And so Senator Winfield is actually campaigning. He's running for his seat. And so we'll talk about that and his candidacy in a minute. Tom, what are you thinking about as it relates to the Connecticut elections?
I think we need to ramp it up in order to be able to show how a blue state's supposed to really be blue in the coming years, to get Gary some reinforcements. I'm also thinking quite a bit about the ballot initiative this year, the amendment to the Constitution that allows for people to vote early. We're one of only 4 states, and 2 of the other 3 are Alabama and Mississippi. Our Constitution doesn't allow folks to vote early. I'm feeling pretty good about that right now. I'll let Gary talk some more, but our priorities at this time are trying to get Gary a bunch more progressive colleagues in the Senate, and Jahana Hayes is federal race for Congress in the 5th CD. It would be terrible if Connecticut was a state that made Kevin McCarthy the Speaker of the House at the national level. And I'm happy to go into more detail on any of those things, but I'm interested in hearing what our friend Gary might have to say on some of this stuff too.
Thank you, Tom. Senator Winfield.
Yeah, I align with much of what Tom just said, particularly thinking about Jahana Hayes and her seat and the possibility of losing it. It's not just shifting power, it's the individual who'll be running for that seat. I served time with him in the Senate, and there wasn't much going on there, right? So, the people in that district, I think, would be being done a disservice by getting that individual as their congressperson. But in the state, I think what you're likely to see coming up is the Democrats retain control, and that's a great thing. But as Tom suggested, we are a blue state, or at least we nominally are. But what I think is more important than a name being a blue state is actually being a blue state and all that should come with that. And what you've seen in the last couple of years are real struggles around things that for a blue state you would think would be basic, right? You and I, Bishop Selders, spent a lot of time when I was doing police accountability, and the struggle that we had with that. When we think about some of our environmental stuff, we moderate ourselves a lot. And if you just go down the list of things that you would tick off, that you would think you would have an easier time doing in a blue state, if you watch Connecticut, you know that there's a lot of, I'm being kind by saying moderating, going on here. So my real concern is not just what the numbers are, but who the people are, and whether or not we can actually move the policy we want to move.
I hear that. So let's start. And Tom offered up the ballot initiative, and so let's start there, and then let's get into maybe some of the specifics, and then maybe even get into some of the races. You were talking about Jahana Hayes' seat as well, so I think we do well to spend some time there. This ballot initiative is an important one, right? And during my entire time here in Connecticut, now that's dating 22 years plus now, this issue of the vote, and in particular, what we're going to call absentee ballot or early voting was a thing. Motor voting was a big old thing. All of these centered around the core idea is that we had to open up the statute, the state constitution. That was the language, and if we do that, we could do something. The argument was so far-fetched to me, I didn't quite understand it. And I think I heard, Tom, that in this current ballot initiative that would allow us to vote early, like every other state except for Mississippi, Alabama, and New Hampshire. I don't know what y'all think about all of that, but there's something there that I'm not going to dig into. I'm just putting it on the table. that we are closely aligned and related to Alabama, Mississippi, and New Hampshire, in that we don't provide the opportunity for voting, by early voting, and so could we come into the 21st century, please? So let's talk a little bit about that. And both of you have been actively involved in these conversations about opening up the state constitution and all that kind of stuff. Can we talk about that a little bit? What's the problem?
Well, the problem is you have to overcome that constitutional question, right? And we tried to do this 7 years ago. What was, I don't remember what it was, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. Look, I knew what we were trying to do, and when I tried to explain it to people, I got lost trying to explain it, right? We use overly complicated language, and there's a reason for that. But we use overly complicated language. People went in, they didn't know what the hell a ballot question was. So they either avoided it. Some people who would have said yes said no. And then some people that we got to said yes. Not a good strategy. And our campaign around it, we had a campaign, but it wasn't the greatest campaign. The question now is pretty simple. The question basically, it's not exactly, but it basically says, should the Connecticut legislature pass laws to allow early voting, something to that effect, right? It basically says what it is you're trying to do. And look, when you're facing the public, unless you have a big campaign that is sustained for a long period of time, that you've gotten to people, you want the simplest question that people can understand on that ballot, because we should have early voting. And you said coming to the century we're in, this is coming into the last century. So just so you know, this is not coming into the century we're in. So Connecticut is well behind on this matter.
Gary's exactly right. And particularly about the confusion around the last time we tried to ask this question. It should be noted that today early voting began in Georgia. And several hours ago, there were over 100,000 people that had already voted just on this first day of early voting. It is so much more convenient for working people and allows grassroots campaigns like Gary's run in the past to actually start to turn their folks out so they can continue to narrow the universe of people they have to pull for elections. We will most likely have another question in 2 years that says you can vote by absentee, no excuse absentee voting, that will allow people to request the ballot like we're able to do again this year because of COVID, and get the ballot and mail it in and not have to worry about what you're going to be doing from 6 to 8 on one particular Tuesday. Right now, the early voting, if we pass this, we'll have to go into town hall to vote. But this is significant. And you asked why. The power brokers in Connecticut have always ruled with a really strict hand. We were one of the last states that had party line, votes where you just go in and you vote for all the Democrats or all the Republicans. We had the most restrictive primary laws in the country, and some people still think we have some of the most restrictive primary laws in the country, and they'd be shocked to hear what it was like before. So we've had a lot of fights, right? Gary just helped to lead the charge to allow a bunch of voting restoration for formerly incarcerated folks, and continues to lead the charge to allow for people, regardless of whether they're incarcerated or not, to be able to vote. And these are important struggles. And we see the voter suppression going around nationally. And this is part of how we've got to show what's the right thing and step forward as a small state like Connecticut to really guarantee the access to vote and making it accessible to working people.
Yeah, see, I don't know what the big idea is. I mean, I get it. I get that you said it kindly, Tom. But can I say it the way I say it? We got people who are very, very much interested in making sure that their friends and the people that they know will vote, and they don't necessarily want it to expand and move out to a larger and larger group of people. I'm always when I arrived here in Connecticut, in Hartford, a town 125,000 people with about 90,000 people who are eligible to vote, that we would have an election for whatever, let me say for mayor. And the mayor could run and win that election with 5,000 or 6,000 votes, right? In the elections with President Obama in both 2008 and then in 2012, we had record turnout vote. Here in the city of Hartford, that meant, 30,000 people voted. Again, of the eligible vote, we only got about a third of the people to participate in the vote. So I'm still aghast by the way that works out here in Connecticut. And I know in New Haven and Bridgeport, while the numbers might be a slightly more, it's not too much better. Our voter participation is weak. So I asked the question, kind of already knowing what the answer is around why people don't want folk to vote. But this is the opportunity now, and you're right, Senator Winfield. It was last century that we was trying to, if we can step into the 20th century around this early voting, it just makes good sense at this point that if we're talking about a democracy, we want participation, right? So, any other wisdom, Senator Winfield? You fought some of these fights, these election.
Yeah, I just want to say, there are people who are trying to keep things as they are, and then there's us, right? And we want to make sure that we understand what's going on around us. Some of us are convinced that voting doesn't matter, right? That's a problem, and we need to have better education of the public. One of the things I see that frustrates me to no end is it's election time, and people like myself are out, and we start talking to people about their civic duty. Nobody want to hear that. Nobody wants to, I believe it to my core, but nobody wants to hear that. And so I often tell a story of going and knocking on doors and people saying, hey, man, come on, come on. They don't come around until it's election time. And what I know is people want to know what they're getting for what you're asking them to do, right? And so what I say to people is, look, here's the deal. You know how you complain about them not coming to your door? I'm going to tell you how to get them to your door. And when they realize that voting can get people to their door, because you get on that list that we use, right? They don't know this. Not like politicians don't think about the fact that the general public don't know what they know, because they didn't know it before they got involved, right? When I start talking to people about the fact that, if you vote, you get on this list, they're going to come to your door because they're going to see you as a voter and that you're one of the targets. People are, look, that's all I got to do. Now they're invested because there's something valuable to them. But if you go around with that civic duty stuff, they're looking at you like, what's that ever bought me, right? Look at my neighborhood. Look at my schools. It's never bought me anything. I'll take getting them to my door so I can have a conversation and curse them out, right? I'll take that. But you gotta get people to understand that there is something in this for them, not just they're giving away something because I'm asking them for it.
Understand, and I think there are, and for me, I think there are multiplicity of responses to the question of, why should I care, and it don't matter and don't mean anything, and for me, there is the kind of intellectual conversation around democracy and our participation, but I have a real simple one as a Black man. There was a time I couldn't vote. Mm-hmm. There was a time that people that looked like me couldn't vote. And even when we had the right to vote, there were all kinds of barriers in place so that we were not allowed to vote in the way that the law said we should vote. And there were people who went, even to the point of losing their lives, and it very close to where I live at. So it's kind of personal on for me on that front. But I think the other part of this is, in this state, we were talking about this state that is considered blue. I have found we're not that blue, and that this is our version of voter suppression. If you just keep the vote to one day, right, for a set of hours at one day, that it is a part of what voter suppression looks like. And I think for me, when you start framing it in that way, then there's another kind of response, or at least a reaction I have found in the context of it. So to say that this ballot initiative is in fact on the docket, right? It's there for us, and we can signal our approval of what I think is a 20 and 21st century reality, and not be. I mean, there are lots of states I don't mind being on the same list of. This one I want to get off this list, with Mississippi, Alabama, and New Hampshire. I want to get off this list of not having early voting. If I was at church, somebody would say amen right there. I'd be looking for an amen.
That or well. Well.
Right. Well, right. Yeah, so and in fact, let me make this clear, and thank you. My beloved is in the chat, and that's right. Let's really be clear. When we say voter suppression, we're talking about Black folk and other persons of color in the state of Connecticut. The largest single voting blocks here in Connecticut are in our urban centers. And so when we're talking about who's going to be blocked to vote, we're talking in large measure many of the folk that look like me and look like you, Senator Winfield. And so it's this is still, it's insidious that we got to talk this plainly, but I think it's important that we just lay it out as clear as we can. This is an important vote. If it weren't for any other reason, we got plenty of reasons. We got a couple of hundred reasons why we need to vote for the state legislature and these constitutional offices. But this ballot initiative, this vote to allow early voting to be the law of the state of Connecticut, is an important distinction to have. And I think, the more people know about it, the more we keep talking about it, we can't get caught up in the loop that I've experienced here as well. As you alluded to it, I think it was you, Senator Winfield, where we get caught unawares, right? Or the campaign is so convoluted, nobody knows what in the world we're talking about, and then ergo we missed the opportunity because we only lost by a few percentage points. Am I correct? When this question came up almost 10 years ago.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
No, please go.
I was just gonna say, you were just talking about being plain spoken. Had we been more plain spoken, we probably would have been done with this by now, right? So, there is a value to speaking to people in a language they understand.
And I'd like to riff off something that Senator Winfield said before. And not only do people want to maintain the status quo, we're not immune from the big lie and the conspiracy theories around election stuff. And when it pops up, as has been mentioned, it is mention of the problems in communities, particularly African American communities. And some of these folks are running for pretty high offices. And some of them, at least one of them I can think of, has spent a lot of time in the circle with Senator Winfield over the last couple of years and taken up a lot of his time talking. But I mean, I think it's important that we make it clear that this is, yes, this is just Connecticut and 3 other states, but this is part of a bigger strategy that is driven in many ways. You didn't use the exact term before, but driven very much by a belief of white supremacy and a fear of people of color taking over and assuming too much power. I mean, that's what so much of the big lie is about. When you look at how Trump attacked Atlanta, how he attacked Detroit, how he attacked all of that. And again, it speaks to the importance of winning and beating these people. And the Republican Secretary of State candidate is definitely one of those flat earthers and has been from before the time that there was the big lie. I mean, he was like pre-big lie, big lie.
And what you see in Connecticut right now, we talk about the Connecticut Republican or the New England Republican. What you see right now is not that at all. Whatever office you're talking about, if you watch the General Assembly and you watch some of these speeches that people give, it is flabbergasting. And I will say this, on that side of the aisle, you often will see the person of color being the one to stand up and say the craziest stuff if they're on that side of the aisle. And that's disappointing because they know what they've lived through. They know what goes on, but they're willing to do that work. I'll tell you, on police accountability, they did not want to really engage. If you watch that debate, they'd say their piece, but they didn't. Most of them did not directly engage with me. The one person on that side who came out the strongest to directly engage with me was a black man. That's a problem. We allow ourselves to be used to foment and uphold white supremacy. That's a major problem. Look, we can have policy differences, but to allow yourself to be used in that way is highly problematic. I don't know how you walk away from that and say I did a good thing.
And that may be a good segue to talk about Jahana Hayes.
Well, let's talk about Congresswoman Hayes' campaign. She is running. Of all of our congressional seats, hers is probably the only one that's actually, while the others are contested, I think this one has a little bit of juice. I think our other members of our caucus, I think we might be okay on the Democratic side. But let's talk a little bit about Congresswoman Hayes' seat and her opponent, and what are the issues that she's facing.
Her opponent is a former colleague of mine, George Logan. He used to represent the 17th district, Hamden, and some of the Valley area, that part of the state, going into areas that Jahana covers. Look, again, I watched him cape for not just his side. That's fine, right? That's what we do. But for these arguments that go against the community, right? The way that we speak about the beloved community, that is problematic. What we are seeing is a race where I don't know what he stands for if I'm watching the race, right? But it doesn't matter, because this is how you have to really think about this. There are people in that district, I believe this, there are people in that district who part of the reason they voted for Jahana had to do with the fact that, let's break it down, she's qualified, she has all the abilities that she should. The people that voted for her because they don't want to be seen as voting against a black woman or a black person, right? And when you introduce a George Logan, now they have somebody who's closer to their values, who's black, so they can not be perceived as what they would be perceived as for voting against her, and vote for him. So she's got to do what you are supposed to be doing anyway, which is draw a real contrast. And when she allows him to drag her into conversations about whether she supports police and all this ancillary stuff, that's not really the thing, right? She's not drawing the contrast, because what she's in fact doing is saying, I'm just like him. I support the police. I support these people. And so people are going to vote for people who they see a contrast and they value that contrast. And so this is why that race is as close as it should not be close. He's not. He should not be able to give this woman a run. He should not, and yet he is.
And I think a lot of it is the amount of money. And I want to talk about how ridiculous. I'll first make mention how ridiculous whether or not she supports cops. She's married to a cop, right? It's an asinine argument that he's making, but that's not what should be important to us. We have a woman who was a Connecticut Teacher of the Year representing us in Congress that knows the day-to-day struggles of our schools and of the kids and of the families that go to those schools, and has fought to try to advance their interests day to day. George Logan is an executive for a subsidiary of Eversource, Aquarian Water, that has lobbied to privatize water supplies in 55 communities in the state of Connecticut. And they have proposed over 25% rate increase over the next 3 years for the people who get water from them in these towns. At a time when we're struggling for everything else, Eversource made tons of money last year. Aquarian was very profitable last year. This is about greed. And we've put out there, we've asked them if the reason that they're asking for Eversource and Aquarian are asking for this ridiculous rate increase is it so they can subsidize his campaigning and his going out campaigning. We have a public school teacher versus an executive for the state's utility and a water privatizer who's trying to rip off people in 55 towns. This should be an easy fight.
But the problem is that's not the way it's framed, right? I agree. I think you're absolutely right. But I think that you have to frame the argument in such a way that that's what people are seeing, right? That's what I know George Logan to be. I saw him stand up on the Senate floor with his phone reading talking points from his company, right? Let's just talk about what we're really dealing with here. That's not something you do. That's like verboten. You don't do that. And yet he did it. So clearly he is a shell for the company, right? And that look, if that's who you are, that's who you are. That the other campaign should be making sure that people are seeing that's who is up there. That what you're going to get is not somebody who's representing you. They're representing the interest of that utility. That's what they're doing. They're representing the interest of money and power. That's always been fine. But when I watch the campaign, that's not how I'm seeing it play out. And you're right. The husband's a cop. But if you start answering the question, that's where the campaign goes. And so now you're talking about stuff you shouldn't be talking about, and you're not drawing that contrast and demonstrating this man is the man that's going to go into Congress and do exactly what you don't want. He's not living the life you're living. He doesn't know the life you're living.
Well, that's why I'm glad you all, the two of you, are on this this show with me, because both of you are experienced. You certainly have dealt with. I remember Mr. Logan and some of the things he said during the struggle a couple of years ago, Senator Winfield, with regards to police accountability, and I was aghast and shocked at some of the stuff he said out loud in public space, but it happened to be 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So maybe not a lot of people were watching, but I was that particular session. And of course, you held fast and was our champion, and answered every single question and every single piece of ridiculousness that was offered during that struggle and that fight. It's again, I think there are some obvious principles here that are important when it comes to people. Here in Connecticut, if you haven't had a water question yet, you will. That's a quiet. It's quiet, but it's not. We had a ballot initiative in our region a few years ago that ultimately ended up with us doing a bit of redundancy around the water. We were asked, do we want clean water, which meant we were having to pay more. We were going to be asked to pay more money when, in fact, the water company here in Hartford, in our region, had already lost the Supreme Court case. They were going to have to pony up. All right. But no, they took it to the people, and the people said, yeah, we want clean water, without knowing all of the facts and all of the struggle behind the scenes. We ended up, on our water bill right now, we end up having to pay more money on a thing. And that money is the water company, and the folk who make money from the water company make more money. All right. Because they were not asked to pony up with the deferred maintenance and the things that went down in that campaign. Again, to your point, to both of your points, is that if we don't get out here and talk about what the issues are, and then fact check us, y'all. Go do your own research. Find out if, in fact, what we're saying is not correct, or it doesn't ring true. There is a thing called the internets now, and that's what we're on. We're on the internets. And so check us out. Check out what are these issues that are important to you. And as it relates to those issues that are important to you, then how do these candidates measure up? And you were going to say something, Tom. I'm sorry.
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, that's Gary, you got more to say about that? I think that's
the only thing I'll say is I just want to just double down on the fact check us. I tell people all the time, look, I'm telling you the truth, but I want you to fact check me, because I think it's important that you not just feel like somebody's talking to you and telling you the truth, but that you know it, right? And that you know the full story, because no matter what I'm doing, it's usually some form of a shortcut. I don't have the time to be in long form most of the time. So, you can only do yourself a service by fact checking all of us, the people you believe in and the people that you don't believe in.
And let me say something here. And I may be getting myself in a little bit of hot water, so okay, I might. I think that when candidates don't know what you think about a thing, then you can't hold them accountable. They got to know what you think, right? So, and a part of, in a political context, holding our candidates and then our elected officials accountable is going to where they are, messaging them, sending them emails and texts and making phone calls, letting them know this is what I think about that thing. You are my representative, and this is what I'm looking for. The example that I have is pretty clear. When we were, a couple of years ago up on the Capitol, working with you, Senator Winfield, and others, as we were talking about police accountability, and calling for this state to deal with it while we were out in the streets, and George Floyd, everybody was out in the streets. It was clear that we wanted our elected officials this is what we want. And I was able to walk right directly up to the governor, who chose to be on the north portico of the Capitol, right in front of us. We were posted up out there, and I was able to walk up to him and say, Mr. Governor, this is why we out here. You saw the sign. Yeah, Bishop, I know. And then, he started bobbing and weaving because he wanted to get out of that exchange quickly. But we were there to hold him accountable. We were there to ask for what we want. Here's another part of this participation in this so-called experiment we call democracy. And I got lots to say about that, but here's where we are. If you're not in conversation with, if you're not letting folk know what you think, what you feel, what your ideas are, then they can't represent you. And so it's got to be that we are also in conversation with our elected officials. And that's important. If you think, for example, a particular issue is important to you, then you need to be registering that particular issue with those particular candidates and asking them, what is your opinion and what do you think and how will you vote? What is your past record, if you will, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And Bishop, let me just say, you brought up an example, so I want to use the example. Police accountability. Look, I think everybody knows I was trying to run forward no matter what was going on, right? That was what I planned on doing. And, if I hit the wall, I hit the wall. But you and others who engage the governor, who give him a sense that it's not some crazy guy who's always talking about this, who's taking opportunity because of the moment, which in fact I was, right? Like there's a moment you've never seen people in Winfield by the tens and tens and tens on the green and in Suffield and all of these people don't come out for this. You've never seen cities across this state shut down, right? There's a moment in time. How dare us miss that moment? Now, most of the country did, but how dare us miss the moment? So I was going to move forward. But when you all engage with the governor and other legislators, they're looking and going, well, he's not alone, right? And that's important, right? Because you could talk all you want about how people should be doing the right thing. That's not how this works, right? And oftentimes you have people out there, usually a small number, trying to do the right thing, and they go out there and get their head taken off. So thank you for what you did, but that is what we should be doing. It does actually matter. It does actually make a difference. It's nice to have my head connected to my neck. You know what I mean?
Well, I think this is that's what we are intending. Our intention as we move forward in these conversations over the next few weeks, to make sure we're making some of these connections clear, and making sure that we're voicing some of these, what I call connecting pieces. We have an opportunity in this state, with the running and winning of a couple of more seats, to actually have some super majorities. And then let's get in here and get something done. Instead of as it relates to the state, we have an opportunity now to take on some big stuff. Now, clearly that's going to take some vision. That's going to take some leadership. And it's going to take a few more folk who are willing to get out there and go strong, just like you have, Senator Winfield, on some issues. But I think we can, I'm hopeful. And Tom, you've been working on environmental justice stuff here of late with CCAG, and we got some things we've deferred for a minute. This water thing is one of them that we've been deferring on it. I don't like the fact that our urban centers have more trash than I think we ought to, because we some stuff is going on that we need to attend to. It is at these places and spaces we have this opportunity to propose legislation, to have some of the bigger conversations. Police accountability here in the state of Connecticut, we're leading the country. Gun legislation and bullets and I learned more than I ever wanted to know about that. Newtown put us in that conversation, that we were able to champion those causes. There are some others that we got too many poor folk in this state. We got too many people that are living in just a low standard housing in this state. We can take on some of this if there's some political will and some of us who would be willing to champion some of these causes and in fact have some of the larger conversations. What you all think? That's what I think.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think there's some people who don't want to get to the point where they don't have an excuse anymore, right? Like, because then you're right. You have to have these conversations. You can't say, well, we're going to lose on any of these things. You can win on anything once you have the supermajority. So what's the excuse then? So, I mean, politics is a very strange game, right? People want to win, but oftentimes they want to win enough to be comfortable, not win enough to actually make significant changes, right? So do we really believe that people want to win enough that they can go out there and have to have these zoning conversations? No, they don't want that. They don't want that, because what that conversation looks like is not a conversation that some of these people believe they're going to win their next election. So if I could get to, if the number is 24, if I could get to 23, good. That's the sweet spot. And just think about what that means, right? They're going out there selling you on, this is what we believe, all of this stuff. but I don't want enough that I could do all the stuff. I don't want enough that I could go deal with the fact that this community has more particulate than that community. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with the fact that, well, it seemed like it was because we just didn't have enough numbers that we had to put off our, restrictions on emissions or whatever the case may be. That's what's insidious about politics when you really want to have this conversation. And that's what you see going on. So, I mean, this is why we have to be involved. We have to be involved enough to understand that. You don't see that without somebody first plainly pointing it out and without being involved, that even the team that's your team isn't really your team. They're their own team, right? Unless you get the right kind of folks involved. Unless the right kind of folks involved as elected officials and the right kind of folks involved, period. Let me just say this one thing about participation. On most issues, nobody calling me. Nope. Not unless something's directly affecting them. When people start calling us, we start getting kind of concerned because people don't call. So the average voter is going to say to themselves, I don't have enough people to make a difference. Yes, you do. 6, 7 people call me on an issue. I'm like, well, that's not what normally happens. Why are y'all calling me? Right? Most of us got 6, 7 people in our families and friends, don't we? So you can make a difference. But unless you get involved and start to understand how it actually works, you would never know that. And you would sit at home thinking, I don't have 400 people, when your 6 or 7 people could actually make a difference and get us to pay attention.
Yeah. So can I just pick up on that? It is sometimes amazing to me that other folk want you to champion what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And I get that. I have, like the two of you, and many, others in this state, we got our own platforms. We can message out how we want to message out, right? And there are people who, for good reasons, I pray, would at least consider what we're talking about, even if they may not agree. And there are things that are important to me. Fair wages are important to me. People with a house, housing, that's important to me. Food insecurity and or security is important to me. There are police accountability and was important to me. And so let me just say this right here. Reproductive justice is important to me. And maintaining a woman's right to her own body to do with it as she and her family pleases. That's important to me. It is. Those are the things that I'm going to talk about. Those are the things you're going to hear from me about. Those are the things that when people like yourself, Senator Winfield, and you know me, I'm going to be texting it. I'm going to say, hey, bro, I'm going to call. What y'all doing about that? Those are the things that are important. If something is important to you, get on the horn, access those candidates and those elected officers and talk about it. To know of us here with More Monday and know the work that we've been doing, I've been kind of a one-note Johnny on some of this stuff. It's the same stuff. I'm not talking about something different. It's the same stuff. So I'm sorry, Tom. You jump in there, man. I know you got you 1 or 2 note Tom too. So I'm John, you Tom. We ain't got but a couple of notes, and I'm gonna hit that same note until it give out.
I think you're exactly right. And something I had actually a staff person for House Democrats a decade or so ago that's no longer there said, oh, we don't want to be any bigger than 89 to 93 because then you crazies run the whole place. And that was, I think at the time, the most powerful staff person for the then Speaker of the House who said that. And I suspect it's held by a lot of key staff people in that chamber. And I think it's up to us to make sure that they don't have the ability lower our expectations and aspiration and dreams and demands. And I think part of that is why we do what we do. There are a number of folks, and since we're late, if it's okay, I'll give a few plugs, and then Gary can correct me and add or subtract. I'm not going to talk about incumbents, who there are much more than there were, or more, well, much more than there were 10 years ago. There was less than a handful of progressives within the state Senate. But there are a number that are running for either open seats or very competitive seats that build on some of the stuff that you've talked about. And there's a teacher out in the Coventry Vernon area who lost by less than a half a point, and that's because Senate Democrats did her wrong 2 years ago. But the incumbent isn't running again. Lisa Thomas, who's running. Somebody, you mentioned Newtown before, running in the Newtown area. It was a real swing district. Somebody who organizes childcare workers all the time and fights for their rights. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman is in a purple district that we should get in a year like this when Roe is on the ballot. Martha Marks also lost very close, a nurse out of New London, who has fought the hospital corporations and all for a number of years and has been engaged in struggle. Again, she lost one of the most powerful Republicans by less than a half a point last time around. He's up for a win. In Meriden, it's an open seat. It's Jan Hockadell, who's once again another teacher, president of Teachers Union, going for, that's not as much of a pickup. And there's one other that we're focusing on. I'm going to get a lot of trouble for not remembering. It's on the other side of the river somewhere. But at least those four, I think, are Senate races that if we were able to add those to the Senate with Gary, it would be very, very difficult for anybody to say no to what Senator Winfield's fighting for. I think that there are people that would be on that same team. Gary, add or offer any additional thoughts?
I think you just laid it out quite well. The only thing I'll say is Martha Marks did well against the incumbent who's now not running. So
I meant to say that. So
she almost beat the guy, right? So she should be able to take that seat. But when you think about the fact that we've been sitting at 23 in the Senate, and if you add even one, you're at the supermajority number for the Senate, right? The only thing that we really would need to do at that point is to get the numbers up in the House, right? Because what's going to happen is if you have the number in the Senate and you don't have it in the House, you're going to be in the same conversation. They're gonna tell you why they can't do all the stuff that we want them to do. Like, I know exactly who Tom's talking about, and that is the conversation. That is what I was talking about. There are people on your side who are sitting there going, just close enough to not make it. That's what they're sitting there doing. Because look, they know the policies that I'm going to come up with. They know the policies that a Julie Kushner is going to come up with, right? And those are the crazy folks, right? They always want to do this crazy stuff. What that crazy stuff means is that you get more pay in your paycheck. What that crazy stuff means is if you're in certain communities and you're a person of color, you're not going to get beat up by the police. What that means is all of the good quality of life stuff that we all would like to have. And your own team, we talk about the Republicans all the time. Our own team is like, well, we have some people on the team who don't like that or don't believe in that. Well, they need to get off the team, right? Like that's what needs to happen. And so, like, I think Tom is dead on, and we need to be paying attention to these races because you're so close to being able to do the things that we need to do. Recovery for All is having a conversation, right, about what it looks like to have fairness in taxing in this state. Well, you can have all the conversations you want if you ain't got the folks. It's nice to sit around and theorize, but if you don't have the people, you can't make the policy happen. So what I'm asking people to do is pay attention and get involved, not because I need you to do that for Gary. Gary's okay. I need you to do that because the state is not okay. We are not as healthy as we should be. We are not as strong as we should be for people who are underrepresented in this state, who have a voice, but that voice isn't currently being heard. So I agree with you completely, Tom.
There,
And if we hold all those seats, all the current ones, and we pick up the 3 challengers that I mentioned, we would be at 26, and that would make some of the other members of the caucus irrelevant. And I won't name names or embarrass Senator Winfield, but or put him on this spot. But we know who they are, Bishop Selders. You know who they are.
You can't embarrass me.
I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to get you nodding in.
well, see, this is so for me, I think what you have named, and you've drawn pretty clear where we're driving, where we need to look for, and what these possibilities are on the Senate side. The same is true in several other races on the House side. We have some opportunities there, and then what I believe we have the opportunity to do is to then have the robust conversation. Let's argue about it, right? If like with, for example, I'm gonna use this because this is the one I was working on in police accountability, and Senator Winfield was working on. So once we were able to get the bill written and introduced, there was all kinds of robust conversation all along the way, and some stuff we understood. Okay, we're gonna have to write this conversation has got to be broad enough, and we're gonna have to edit. We're gonna have to change. We're gonna have to take sections of this and deal with it and struggle with it. We can't do any of that if we're not even having some of these conversations. And what allows for us to have some of these conversations in the committees, in the caucuses, up at the Capitol, in community. What we're talking about is our democracy in the way this experiment has worked out, and especially here in New England, where we value the town hall, the premise of us being able to show up at a spot and give folk a piece of our mind and tell folk how we think and what we believe ought to happen. If in fact that's important, and I believe it is, then it should be important enough for us to get out to vote and allow for us to have some of these conversations in broad ways. Who knows what'll happen if we really talk about, So we knew when we got the increase in the $15 hour pay increase, for example. We knew we needed 23 when we got 15. Let's go for it. Let's turn it up a notch, if we will. If we know that we have in our ability to make sure that everybody has can have affordable health care, let's go. Let's go do that. And here we are again, 20 years later. When I arrived here 20 some years ago, we talked about at least starting to write the tax laws here, the policies around who gets taxed and how much they get taxed. Here we are again. Every year we talk about balancing the budget, and then each side gets say, well, we balance the budget. Yeah, we balance the budget, but on whose backs did we balance that budget in the statewide? And I think in many instances, as far as I'm concerned, poor people and underrepresented folk bear a larger weight of that than others do. I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know.
You don't follow behind that, right? What'd you say? Amen.
Amen.
I know. Listen, friends, we're out of time. We only promised to do an hour. What I'm going to do is prevail on you that maybe in the coming couple of weeks, as we come down to it, I may ask you to jump on again and holler at folk one more time. I've appreciated very much the opportunity to have just a little bit of this kind of conversation. These are the conversations, folks, that we have when we're not doing this right here. We meet on a regular basis, or at least and talk as often as we can. And I call this world changer conversation, right? Let's talk about changing the world as we know it. And I hope that we've said something that have at least sparked the interest that may even got you turned up a little bit. Maybe we done got you mad and got you upset. Well, that's good, because then I believe when you turn up a little bit, then that might motivate you to get involved in some kind of way, and that's ultimately what these conversations are actually about. How do you get involved? How do we become participatory in our both our civic process, but also our life process? You know, if we don't do that, then you can't. Here's what I say all the time. You're talking, I'm in the barbershop, I'm with some family, and they start out talking about this, that, and the other, and it has some political tinge to it. And then I say, you registered to vote? When they say no, and then I stop talking. And for me, that's where the conversation is ended. Because if it's important enough for you to argue a position, then it's important enough for you not only to argue with me, but get off your do nothing and do something, right? Go down there and register to vote. And then when it's time to vote, go vote your ticket. And so that's what these conversations are about in this season. It's time to go vote your ticket. Go vote your ticket. Let me again thank you, Tom Swan from Connecticut. What's the name of your organization? Connecticut.
CCAG is good enough. CCAG. Listen. Ralph Nader would be so mad at me if I messed up the organization that he helped to found. Anyway, CCAG, Connecticut Citizen Action Group, and then of course our friend and our champion, that's continuing to be on the wall, State Senator Gary Winfield. Thank you both for this conversation, this relevant conversation. We'll be back at you all again next week, this same bat channel, this same bat station, to talk some more interesting and what we call relevant conversations. Thank you all, brothers, so very much. We'll see you next time. All right. Peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you.